Welcome to this panel. I'm Doris Fuchs, I'm the coordinator of the EU 1.5 Lifestyles project, and we're one of the three parties organizing the conference. This panel is our core panel in the conference, where we kind of bring all the results for you together and say what we found and what we believe this means. We'll do so in a straight run through, right? So we'll have 5 presentations, one after the other. If you have questions in between, please note them down. We'll keep them to the end. We'll have a long time for question and answer at the end. But we expect that some of the questions will relate to several work packages or will preempt the next work packages, and therefore we want to keep the questions to the end. I'll be very brief right now. I'll only leave you with just a very bit of background information. The EU 1.5 Lifestyles project, Horizon 2020 funded, set out to answer the following questions. What are the most impactful low-carbon lifestyle options, and what are the conditions that households will adopt them? And what structural changes are needed to enable the adoption and impact, lasting impact of these options? And on the basis of answers to these questions, then we aim to develop guidance for policymakers as well as for citizens. Oh, I forgot to say something. We are 9 partners plus 1 management organization from 7 countries, and we have 5 case countries. We did all of our qualitative research in Spain, and Sweden, and Hungary, and Germany, and in Latvia. And the other important part to know about our project is while we use the lifestyles term, and that has a very individualistic sound to it, we actually understand lifestyles to be embedded in structural contexts. Lifestyles are the results of what individuals want, but also what structures enable them to do, incite them to do. Right? So please always, in the context of our project, think of lifestyles as having an individual dimension, but also a structural one. And we did our research in 4 consumption fields. We looked at nutrition, mobility, housing, and leisure. And we'll present it now to you in the following sequence. We'll start with Steph Kapp from the University of Leiden, who will present the quantitative analysis of our project and its core results. Halike Kreinen from RIFS, the Research Institute for Sustainability in Germany, will talk about structural barriers. We're keeping this? Yes, I think so. Okay. Sorry, I was expecting a different sequence, as you can tell. I'm slightly confused. We'll go with that sequence. Halike will then come and talk about the structural dimension of all of this. And as Briska from Green Liberty in Latvia will also talk about structures in the context of the larger question of the welfare state. Lena Domröse and Jessica Ludrichter from Adelphi in Germany and the University of Lund, respectively, will talk about the most impactful lifestyle options, conditions of their acceptance and side effects, also in terms of how do we mitigate against rebound. And then Edina Vadovic from Green Dependent Institute in Hungary and I will do the summing up so that you get reminded of what everybody has said in the end. And we'll also try to draw out some implications. And with that, we'll get started.
Thank you, Doris. So I will be presenting work that was also completed with colleagues from Leiden and other partners within the 1.5 Degree Lifestyles Consortium. So in terms of what are the most impactful lifestyle changes, we are contributing to a robust and growing literature about the carbon footprint mitigation potential of behavior changes. So the literature includes the estimated carbon footprint reduction of individual changes in Europe, about changes in Europe taken together, but an average across Europe. There's been research on estimating the carbon footprint reduction of portfolios of lifestyle change in Europe, comparing the carbon footprint reduction of a European and an Asian country. There has been a meta-analysis on the global scope of the carbon footprint reduction potential of lifestyle changes, and also the recent IPCC report, which really highlights the importance of demand-side mitigation. And and of course, there are a few usual suspects when we talk about high-impact behavior changes, such as giving up a car, adopting a vegan diet, getting away from fossil fuel, energy use in the home, and giving up long-haul flights. So we're building on a robust literature. However, there are some questions, which if we have a global average for the emissions mitigation potential of a lifestyle change, is that relevant for Europe? And is that representative of Europe? And then let's say we have an estimate for a European average, which might be biased towards data availability in a certain country. Is that representative of various different countries across Europe? And are estimates from these different countries representative of each other? So we thought we had something to add, and I'll share with you those results. Additionally, we also looked at the perspective aspect. Because, for instance, if there are estimates for the present day, this might change in the future if industry also contributes by decarbonizing, if the electricity system moves to more renewable energy, and if all these decarbonization policies are put into place. So we looked at, we used an input-output analysis-based approach, namely Firebase, and we started with the baseline model in 2015, and created two prospective scenario models in 2030 and 2050, which assume decarbonization in line with 1.5 degrees, but only from industry and technology that's not related to household change, because we add in the lifestyle and household change ourselves. And we preserve the different input-output table components to represent this lifestyle change. And, well, for these results, I'll be presenting the differences across countries and across the years. And, of course, might be difficult for everyone to see, but we got you because we have an interactive infographic for you all to explore. And, but overall, you can see that there's a few very high impact options, which also reflects what's going on in the literature. And then there are some options which are less impactful, but still important because they might have synergistic effects with other options. So I will be zooming in on this, don't worry. So one of our kind of headline results is that the changes involving the vehicle offer the largest footprint reduction potential across countries, but also across the scenario years. And in the baseline year of 2015, we see that the carbon footprint reduction potential of the vehicle is around 1/5 of the carbon footprint on average in these countries. But when we look to 2050, this increases to almost half of the carbon footprint. And this is because the upstream emissions are decarbonized, but the direct emissions from the combustion in a vehicle are still unmitigated. So this is something that becomes even more important over time. And also some of the changes, such as giving up a car and switching to public transportation, those also converge in impact over time with the different countries in terms of the gap between giving up a car and public transportation closes. And we also see some changes over time, such as, for instance, switching to a heat pump. That's something that doesn't look very high impact if you only view it in the baseline year. But in 2050, with the decarbonizing electricity system, especially in Hungary and Germany, this is something that we see as becomes even more high impact, almost on the level of giving up a car. So that's something interesting to see from the temporal dimension. And kind of on the opposite perspective, using renewable electricity is something that's important for households in the baseline year, but as the energy mix or the electricity mix decarbonizes, that's something that it's less impactful for households to do themselves. And for options that don't have high penetration across a population, such as flying. Some people fly not at all, some people fly a lot. And when we look at the individual level of those flying, the carbon footprint reduction potential can actually double or triple for those individuals who are flying compared to a country average. And the same is also true for treating a pet. That's one of those options that is around less than 1% mitigation potential of the carbon footprint if you look at the country average. But if you only consider that that applies to people who have a pet, the impact can be approximately equivalent to adopting a vegetarian diet in some countries. And of course, the big headline question is, well, all these changes are well and good, but when we adopt them together, are we going to be able to reach this 1.5 degree target that we so desperately want and need? So in order to answer this question, we constructed lifestyle change portfolios. And right now, I'll be talking about two here. So the first is a general portfolio that includes all these 47 different options. And the second is a high impact portfolio that chooses only the most high impact options because the options, some of them are mutually exclusive. So you can't replace red meat with chicken and become vegan. So I'll show you the results for these two portfolios. Okay, so you know what? I don't think I'd be able to see that, but I will explain it to you. So the blue bar is the carbon footprint without rebound effects considered, and the red part is the additional emissions, including rebound spending. And overall, when we look at the highest impact portfolio, all of the 5 countries can meet the 2030 target with adoption of this portfolio, whether or not rebound effects are considered. So that's quite good news. And then when we look to the general portfolio, which includes some of those less high impact options, so Germany, Spain, Hungary, and Latvia can meet the target, but only Spain and Hungary can meet it with rebound effects included. And in 2050, the pathway to reaching this target narrows, as in only Spain and Hungary can meet the 2050 target with this highest impact portfolio, and this is not including any rebound spending. And of course, there are still quite large carbon footprint reduction potentials possible, as you can see from the partially decarbonized baseline in gray into the carbon footprint of these portfolios in blue. So there is a lot of reduction possible from lifestyle change, but that 2050 target is very strict. So, and overall, we also assess the different adoption rates of these portfolios overall that will be necessary to keep us at this target. And between the different countries, the adoption rates do vary. So for instance, Germany and Sweden would require almost double the adoption rate of Spain and Hungary. And maybe unsurprisingly, the highest impact portfolio also reduces the amount of adoption of lifestyle change, but then they might be more high impact options that people might be a bit hesitant to uptake, which other colleagues will discuss. And in 2030 or 2050, there's much less variation across portfolios and countries in that we would basically require full adoption of all these different lifestyle changes, along with the background system changes, to have a chance of remaining within the 1.5 degrees target. So, hope everyone's ready for a challenge. So, overall, so there are, of course, many limitations, and we based our analysis on the excited-based input output model, and if anything, this is great for global analysis, but when it comes to smaller countries, there can be some issues with data quality and reliability. And additionally, we looked at 3 different points in time, and it's a quite stylized lifestyle change representation. So in different type of modeling, you might be able to see, okay, if we front load some of this lifestyle change, will it save us in the future? And that's not something that's possible with this type of model. And also we used homogeneous consumption groups, like an average over a country, and that's something that would be interesting to look at maybe high and low income groups in the future. Of course, lots of investment in infrastructure is necessary, and we didn't consider that here. And maybe the biggest limitation is we followed the SSP1, which includes quite high GDP growth, and that's something that we might need to consider is influencing the ability to meet the 1.5 degree target. And overall, so in terms of having the results in different countries and over time, in Europe, diets might be quite similar. So a European average could be quite representative of different countries, but we saw from the differences results in the different countries for things involving combustion of fossil fuels, such as driving a car or using a fossil fuel boiler. Those are something where we really saw differences on a country level, so it's great to have these results. And of course, the magnitude of lifestyle change necessary really highlights the importance of prioritizing high impact changes and increasing the acceptance and adoption of these changes. So thank you very much. Here are some of the papers and more infographics, my digital business card. If you have any questions, email. Thank you.
Can you hear me? We have a really busy schedule, so it's on. My name is Harihi, and I'm from the Research Institute for Sustainability, and also for the project. And I will be talking a little bit about structural barriers, which was also a keyword package for the project. So we talk a lot about 1.5 degree lifestyles and 1.5 degree transformation. But in our project, we have an understanding actually that the needed 1.5 degree transformation must also include transformation of the framework conditions in which people live. So lifestyles happen within wider structures. And Doris already talked a little bit about structures. We understand structures quite broadly to be both infrastructures, material, economic, political, societal, and additional structures. We've talked a lot today as well as yesterday about individual agency versus structural change. And of course, we need both. And in our project, we also try to kind of overcome this barrier between both. And we understand structures on the one hand to be generated through agency, but agential action also to be, as I mentioned, shaped through structures. And here I will move on to our first paper, discussing this problem, co-authored with Stefan, who I believe is in the audience with us, where we look at deep and shallow structural barriers and enablers. And one of our key outcomes is that we need change across the board. So we need change in additional structures, in material structures, in shallow structures, and in deep structures. And I hope I don't lose my voice, so you can all understand me. For household sustainability. At the same time, it's much easier for us to talk about shallow structural changes, and I think this is a wider problem maybe within the sustainable consumption field as well. So it's quite easy for us to talk about individual switches, for example, to take a bus, or switching to vegetarian diets. I mean, even these actions are quite difficult. But in general, it's much harder for us to talk about deeper structural changes, so to the economic system that we have, based on economic growth and so on. And at the same time, of course, these sort of invisible, deeper structures shape the individual small actions that we take, and we need to do much more work to make these deeper structures visible. And that's also what I've done. I really feel like my voice might disappear by the end of this presentation, but just bear with me. And okay, I don't know if the water will help, but it's nice.
Brandy, sorry.
Yeah, I think we might need something harder. Some more deeper structural changes. In general, climate governance really lacks an understanding and a consideration of these deeper structures. So, again, bringing up economic growth, inequality, and some of the other aspects that I will come back to. And, of course, the issue is that these structures are invisible and yet very powerful. And for any successful transition, we need a much more radical shift in our perspective and understanding of these structural inhibitors and barriers. So here is our paper. This is a little bit of promotion for us. If you're interested in our categorization, so we come up with a new categorization: deep and shallow structural enablers and barriers, and so you can feel free and have a look. And with that, I already move on to our second paper, kind of on this topic in the project. And I'm really flying through them, so there's much more there. Whereas the previous paper was based on this huge literature review of how structures are discussed in sustainable consumption literature. This next paper is based on that literature review and the outcomes being used for a small-scale Delphi study within our project, and then expert interviews, and then also backcasting stakeholder workshops, or as we call them, stakeholder thinking labs. So there's also kind of a bit of methodological background. Sorry, I'll not take you through that because otherwise I would take up the 12 minutes. But what we find out from our expert interviews is that most experts consider overcoming the economic growth paradigm the biggest barrier to 1.5 degree lifestyles, which is not a big surprise, I guess, for anyone here. The second biggest barrier is the lack of integrated policies and general sort of coordinated policy action across different silos. Then the third biggest barrier is the influence of vested interests, so the power of elites, so to speak, in the economic system. And this thing, okay, it's working, it's great. The fourth one is the lack of economic incentives for sustainability, and the lack of internalization of environmental costs. And the fifth sort of structural barrier that experts consider the biggest problem is the lack of alternative narratives of a good life, with a lack of sort of positive visions of 1.5 futures, if you like. The sixth biggest structural barrier is inequality in society, in terms of resources and also power and wealth. And the seventh barrier, but also enabler, would be sustainable education and much more integration of 1.5 degree lifestyles in school curricular and skills and so on. And I just have to mention that these seven key structural barriers, they work on different levels and also overlap when we come back to this point about structures being sort of this invisible, dark, sleeping force. And this is information we got from 36 experts across 5 countries in Europe. And I will come back to the stakeholder thinking labs a little bit later. But just to tease you a little bit, this is the paper that comes out of this research on structures and how to overcome them. And I already come to a third paper where we basically research responsibility for change and overcoming structural barriers to 1.5 degree lifestyles. And here we look at, so we take all the research that we've done already, and we did some more thinking about the stakeholders. And we look at how basically different actors evade responsibility for transformation, and to kind of also explain why we are where we are at the moment after maybe 50 years of consumption, sustainable consumption research. And we highlight that what we see governments currently do so governments are locked in the status quo of unsustainable production and consumption, whereas we would need them to take much more of a leadership role in more systemic reforms, welfare, eco-social welfare, and regulation for especially high-carbon sectors. And businesses are also locked within the current economic paradigm in structures focused on short-term profit. Again, nothing new, I guess, for anyone here. And also in a sort of dependent relationship with the state, whereas we would need, thank you, Christoph, businesses to innovate much more within ecological limits, so to increase transparency. And oh my god, sorry, go develop low impact business models. And finally, we come to households and citizens. So there's a sort of ping pong happening between these actors, and citizens also refuse to take responsibility, basically having unrealistic expectations of state-taking action, and feeling like they have limited agency. And what we actually need is for citizens and households to also take action not as consumers, but as citizens, to join communities and demand political accountability from the governments and also change from businesses. So with that in mind, this is this is a little teaser for our paper, which is already out. So if you want to know what happens next, you can read it. I'm going to briefly synthesize what I've said, and Doris and Edina will come back to this in much more depth. What we suggest in the project is that we need much more integrated policy solutions across the different consumption fields that were already mentioned. Based on eco-social justice, we need new cultural narratives to overcome the current, I want to say it's not stronghold, it's the other word, status quo, stuckness. And we need to design the way our provisioning systems or our consumption fields work away from these rent-seeking dynamics of economic growth, and reframe responsibility in this forward-looking way where citizens take action and responsibility, governments take action and responsibility, and businesses take that as well. And I will, Edina and Doris will continue on this and give much more information. Thank you for your attention, and I believe I pass this on. It's like some sort of like speed dating event here. Thank you.
Thank you, Helaki. Hello, everyone. My name is Jānis Britka. I'm from Green Liberty. It's an environmental group in Latvia. And I will continue about the structures. We specifically looked at the welfare state, so trying to connect the social and environmental elements together. And today, in several sessions, I already have heard how important it is to continue this work and linking maybe social and climate elements in one system, both for communications, but also for how we can understand how the climate policies and the bigger structural systems are linked together with the welfare development. So what we were doing, we were running Delphi sessions, 3 sessions of surveys in Germany, Spain, Latvia, Hungary, and Sweden. We have 20 participants in each of the countries where they were discussing a list of different welfare state policy options in relation to the climate change, and then we were assessing how we can actually see the dynamics, how the stakeholder perspectives on these policy interventions change through time and throughout the discussions with each other. And I will be presenting more about the options which we choose to discuss, and also some of the results from these discussions. So these are the welfare policy options which we proposed for Delphi participants to discuss. As I said, it's based on the bigger literature research. We divided them into two groups. These are policies related to labor and wealth. Working hour reduction, it could be designed in a different way, that we have a shorter working week, or we have a shorter day. There is a lot of argumentation for one on another option, how that would be, which one would be better. There is clear link with the time spent, income, as well as climate impact. So that was one of the policy options which we proposed for the discussion. Job guarantees was one more, looking at how, if we prioritize some of the industries, trying to decrease maybe more polluting, more carbon intensive business sectors and industries. There is a shift in labor markets, and how we can provide jobs for wider society. That was another policy option which we proposed for debates in Delphi's. Income ceiling. There is also wide debate about the income inequalities, but also climate inequalities, emission inequalities. So there is big differences for different social groups and how big the footprints are. There is a clear connection between the welfare policies as well as climate. Then another set of policy options were related to the provisioning services. We have heard also today several presentations about that. We choose two public services, transportation and housing. And then a bigger kind of group of public services which we put under the universal basic services. So for transportation, providing accessible public transport for different social groups is some of the shift which we want also from this list of 50 lifestyle options, and moving people away from private cars to public transport. So cheap, accessible, or maybe for free public transport could be something which could stimulate that. The same for innovation, to link together access to housing with low emission solutions for housing is something which is important. And as I said, rights to essential public services in general, that was third policy option under this group of public services. We were looking at two elements: desirability and feasibility of these options. So the participants were going through several series of debates and voting to see which of their options are more desirable in terms of connecting climate and social elements. You see, there is a significant difference. Yeah, renovation, free public transport, there is very high desirability, but even then there are groups which say that some of these options might not be desirable. So there is big differences in for different stakeholders. But options like income ceiling or job guarantees, they might receive they might be perceived as least desirable if you compare them. Changes through time. We didn't really see clear increase or decrease for support throughout the debates. For example, free public transport in the first survey, there was a big support, and it decreased through the debates, and maybe people were finding different arguments why free public transport might not be the best option for dealing with social and climate options, and then kind of rebounding back to the initial thinking about desirability of these options, and similarly for some of the other policy options. And another question was about the feasibility, how quick these policy options should be implemented. So starting from 2030, 2040, 2050, or never, so postponing somewhere in infinite future maybe. You know, it's easy to postpone something for somewhere late in the end of the century. And these responses are very similar to the desirability. Yeah? Something which you don't want to, you don't really think is very desirable. It's easy to postpone for somewhere later in the future. For example, income ceiling. Never. A lot of people, for example, in Spain or also in Latvia, feel it as a policy option which will be never should be implemented. But the options like housing renovation, something which we have to do immediately. Not very big surprises, I guess, for most of you. Also, when we see how the feasibility changes through time, there is no big jumps in time perspective. These are mean values, so the income ceiling is somewhere far away in the future, and most immediate would be something which is related to energy efficient buildings or also working hour reduction. Yeah, that is something which will be implemented in a close future. For conclusions. The climate and social policies are not very much integrated in none of the countries which we were working with. Yeah, that was from the policy debates with different stakeholders. They're very far apart from each other, and it took really effort and discussions for different stakeholders coming both from climate background or from social policy background to understand why they are brought together in these Delphi workshops, and they have a lot in common. So there is a big gap between these two different policy fields, but also how the stakeholders actually look at these issues, and we need to bring them together to better understand these interconnections and bridge this gap. There is a very important need for policy mix when we are talking about how we can actually implement some of these policies. Like Kaliki was talking about the different stakeholder interventions. We're here looking at the policies. We also see that there is a need for there is no one policy fixed all, so there is a need for this integrated policy mix. Also, how we look at work, innovation, governance issues. That's just something which there is a need for paradigm, how we actually value work and how important it is in our daily lives and policy developments. And also in the project we have developed lists of policy recommendations, including the policy recommendations on welfare. So this is something which to look after and check it out. I will also do promotion. Results from these Delphi workshops are described in this paper published recently in Regulation and Governance, and you can go more in depth about the results there and see our thinking about this. Thank you, and now
Yeah, hello, my name is Lena Domröse, I'm from Adelphi, and this is Jessica Richter from Lund. We're going to talk about the lifestyle options and about acceptance and side effects of these options. So, just as a reminder, what Stephanie said in the very first presentation, we had over the project identified through literary research 50 different lifestyle options in 4 different consumption domains: housing, nutrition, mobility, leisure, and other. But the others we didn't quantify, so they are just a footnote. Steph modeled the potential to reduce the carbon footprint of these 50 options. And I brought you one slide here, and I don't, you can read this. What you see from left to right are these 50 options for an average citizen. Average citizen in this case means an average of our 5 case countries. And the options on the left-hand side with the highest carbon reduction potential are, for instance, I will give up my car and walk or cycle instead. It's the first one, the top one. Then the one with the trunk, I will replace my car with the use of public transport. I will switch from using a conventional car to an electric car. And then you see the biker, I will drive less for my hobbies and leisure. And then you see one with a heat pump and one with a biomass boiler that are to replace some conventional heating systems. So I picked those to show you what the most impactful options for an average citizen of our 5 case countries are. And now we measure acceptance. We did this in our citizen thinking labs. These are labs or workshops with 20 to 25 citizens per case country. We had 5 case countries and 2 rounds of these labs. And we engaged citizens in a climate puzzle game. You can find our puzzle game in 5 languages also at a stand outside in each coffee and lunch break in the next days. And the idea of this puzzle game was to have people select or discard different lifestyle options. So, would you be willing to implement this lifestyle option? What was the question? The answer could be yes or no. And if it was no, we asked why not? What would you need to implement this lifestyle option? And this helped us a lot to collect what we called conditions of acceptance. So I'll give you just one example of a very unpopular lifestyle option. It was, I will choose a vegan diet. And we asked people, what would you need to become a vegan? And for example, responses we collected were, we need cheaper prices for meat substitutes. We need better information and education on how we can cook vegan or vegetarian meals that are still healthy and give us everything we need. And we need a bigger availability of these dishes in, for example, canteens or restaurants. And now my next slide is about the most popular options in our labs. Oh, there's no text. Wait, where's the text? It's not shown. Great. Okay, so I tried on the top of my head. So the first two bars hitting 95% are in the field of nutrition. And what people liked the most was the option, I will not produce food waste and I will not overeat. So these were options that were, people were very much in favor. Then we have these two bars, 98% acceptance rate in the third lot of two. This is housing. This is the housing sector, and it was, I think, I will choose energy efficient appliances and energy efficient lighting. And what we found, and I will spare the other ones because I don't know them by heart, but we found that people very much preferred lifestyle options that did not imply significant behavior change, and they would rather do some financial investments to limit their carbon footprint. Yeah, okay, let's move to my last slide, where I now looked at the most impactful options that I showed you in the beginning, the bubbles that you also couldn't read, and what people, how high the acceptance rate were for these options. And you can see that they are between 55.8% for I will replace my heating system with a biomass boiler, up to 79% acceptance for the option I will drive less for my hobbies and leisure. So it's a medium to medium high acceptance rate for the most impactful options that we have in our portfolio of the project. And this shows again, or basically in our lab we found what then Hanneke already addressed also in her speech, we need to change structures that enable people to adopt sustainable lifestyles, because all these car-related options depend heavily on infrastructures that are currently not available and that allow people to move without a car, for instance. And I think I'm already over time, so I hand it to you.
Thank you, Lena. So in the labs that Lena has described, we were having these 20 to 25 citizens in each country who were what we would call trying to get average citizens or a diversity of citizens. But we also looked at citizens who had already implemented some of those high impact, least accepted options. And again, here we can say that we had this list of the average citizen and what would be high impact for them on average, but also, as Steph mentioned too, if someone was a frequent flyer before, that can be high for their individual footprint. So we also included some of the options for people who had some kind of high impact for their individual footprint, like flying, and had made a significant change in their lifestyle to change that option. So we had looked at options such as I flew before and I stopped flying, I drove, I gave up the car, so if somebody had made a change in their household. I used to eat meat, I stopped eating meat. And I used to live in a bigger housing, and I either am sharing housing now or living in a smaller housing, but like less per capita in there. And we were looking for two things, or two parts here with this other lab here. We were looking for what do people do after making this change with any money. Did it cost more in making this change? Did it cost less? And again, what did they re-spend? Again, a financial mechanism towards rebounds, because we also saw that rebounds are important towards reaching these targets if we consider them. And we were looking at when people make these changes, they are significant to their lifestyle. What else happened? So we were looking at what happened with their finances. We were also looking at what happened with their time, how they used time differently. So we were looking at
Again, lifestyle options like I chose to live smaller. What did you do instead? What kind of substitution behavior? What did you do instead with your money? What did you do instead with your time? Why? So we are also looking at motivations, the motivation behind the initial change, the motivation behind what they did instead, the motivation behind why did they spend on what they spent, why did they spend their time the way they spent their time. Walking through the changes that began with this initial change. And one thing that we found is often this initial change, as we call it, was not the initial change. It might have been the next change after something else. That lifestyles are actually quite complicated. And this was also something that we kept in mind here as well, that we weren't only looking at rebounds as an effect, we are also looking at what other effects happened beyond rebound. Because as we found when we're talking qualitatively with people, yes, they can go a little bit with us, oh, I spent my money on this and that. And we did have some quantitative other studies outside of this project that we could see how people spend their money. But we wanted to know how they thought they spend their money, but also what else changed. So we were also looking at what other effects happened. In particular, what they saw as negative effects, as we saw negative effects for the climate impact as rebound, but what did they see as also a negative effect? Were there also positive effects? And we found quite complicated results here. Again, stories here, giving up flying, and then what was an effect of this, and an undesirable effect is the sadness about not being able to travel freely with my children and show them the world the way my parents did. But also some positive spillovers along the way as well. So a desirable effect of giving up meat, by ditching meat, I started changing my consumption behavior in other areas as well, step by step, including reduction of used plastics and dairy products. So we saw a lot of evidence of what we would call spillover effects, that these initial high impact changes were then leading to more, or that they were the result of a spillover effect as well. We were also getting more complete pictures when we asked people to draw effects beyond our nice, simple. Trying to keep people's lifestyles inside a box was not very easy to capture. That we saw all sorts of effects. And yeah, we can say that there were some negative effects, there were some positive effects, and it was very hard to say that they canceled each other out or to quantify them in some way when people are talking about the stories, because also they changed over time. What might initially have been a negative effect, they learned to deal with, to adapt to. Maybe they lost some friends, but they made new friends. Maybe this was hard at the beginning, but then they gained some skills in cooking new foods, this sort of thing. So we found that a lot of what we had seen before in some of the quantitative studies, the surveys, could only be seen as snapshots. But when we talked to people that had made these changes, we got a more complete story of how this could become a positive story, even some of the negative effects we saw along the way. We saw a lot more evidence for the spillover effects, as I said, than the rebound effects, that people were aware in making these changes often. They were doing it for a reason, and they knew that they were going to have effects from doing it, and they were trying to be consistent. If they were doing it for the climate, that the next thing they would do with their money, their time, or their new capacity would be also for climate. So we can say here that we have some recommendations in terms of enabling lifestyles, like the mobility and the high impact. Reducing the car use requires also improved access to public transport. That nutrition and the switch to the plant-based diet is incentives for switching to vegan and better awareness. That all of these, for the initial changes, also help with these limiting rebound and supporting those who have made these changes. We also need public support for new housing and infrastructure in order to support the renewable heating. Investments in cross-border infrastructure as well to support the reduced air travel and car use. That all of these things we had found helped make these lifestyle changes easier for those who had made them already, and were necessary, the conditions under which those who were considering them would find the ability to make them. And overcoming rebound effects really was about having that community support and facilitating the conditions in which people could respend their time, their money, and spilling over into more environmental decisions and practices. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We are almost at the end. And we'll now talk about the core insights. I'm saying we because I'm only going to be doing the first part of this. I'll be focusing more on our case countries. I'm sure by now you are very familiar with our 5 case countries, so I'm not going to repeat them. I'll instead switch to the next slide. And here, if you remember from Lena's presentation, you saw the average European carbon reduction impact for the 5 case countries. Here, I'm showing you the 5 country graphs, and the intention is not for you to be able to read the details here, but to please notice the patterns and the size of the bubbles being different in the 5 countries, and also the pattern of how the bubbles are distributed in the case countries, emphasizing the fact that it's not enough to do planning at the global, well, and even at the European level, but we have to be looking at case country levels as well to see what is more important, what should be the priority action. Also, to look at this from a different point of view and consider the socio-economic context of these changes, and I picked out a graph to show you that's not from our research, but from the research that we based our work on, that shows which percent of the population already lives, already follows the low carbon lifestyle that we should be following by 2030. And you can see that in our 5 case countries there are quite considerable differences. You can see that in Hungary and Latvia, almost a third of the population already has this carbon footprint. In Spain, around 15-20%, much less in Sweden and even less in Germany. And this does not mean that in Hungary and Latvia we are so good, we are so low carbon. It means that quite a considerable part of the population lives in energy poverty, and their basic energy needs are not met. So we have to, when implementing, when designing strategies, when implementing lifestyle options, we really have to take this into consideration and communicate the same lifestyle option differently depending on which country we are talking about. And to take this a bit further, I'm going to give you some examples from the housing domain, that examples and data that were brought up by either citizens or stakeholders in our thinking, in our various thinking labs. And just to show you some bits of data, for example, reducing per capita housing size is quite an important option in the lifestyle domain of housing. But it does matter which country we are looking at this, because in Latvia, which has the smallest per capita housing size among these 5 countries, they are already at the sustainable level, well, the level considered sustainable in some part of the literature. But in Sweden, the largest per capita housing size, it's quite a lot bigger. So again, we need to consider that when implementing options. Also interesting differences in house ownership. In Germany, the lowest ownership people are okay with renting or even like renting in Germany, whereas in Hungary 90% of the population likes to own their own. So when we are talking about sharing housing space, another important lifestyle option, we need to consider this data. Also, the existence of home types supporting these options, sustainable housing options concerning energetic status. Houses are in much worse condition in Hungary and Latvia than in Germany and Sweden. And it's also interesting to consider whether, for example, co-housing options exist. In Germany, Sweden, and even Spain, they do exist. People know about this. Even if they are not the mainstream, they are there. Whereas in Hungary and Latvia, they are not even there. Well, or hardly. They are just coming up. So it's much more difficult to suggest these options for people. And an interesting background data you have just heard about acceptance. Sharing housing space is one of the least accepted options as well in our research, and even though these housing types exist in Germany, it's still not much more accepted than in Hungary. So the picture is really complex, and it's very important to talk to people, to talk to stakeholders, and take these differences into consideration. Also, the existence of organization and stakeholders supporting this change. For example, housing associations were mentioned by stakeholders as really important in supporting these sustainable housing options, but in Hungary we don't have them at all. So there we have to work with other stakeholders or create these stakeholders. Also, the level of discussion that we discovered we needed to have was different in our case countries. In Hungary and Latvia, it was much more relevant to discuss issues at the national level and invite regional and municipal stakeholders there, whereas in Germany, in Sweden and Spain, stakeholder discussions happen much more at the regional or municipal level. So these are really all important factors to consider when we want to create change. And this is where actually I want to close if my slides would move. I'm not sure what is happening here or if we can get some support in moving to the next slide. Anyway, that's just the conclusion for me, that we really have to consider these differences when we are planning change, when we are talking to stakeholders and citizens, and also we have to have resources to have these discussions, because these not just money and financial resources, but also human resources for people to spend time to be able to discuss these differences and to be able to design options and pathways considering different options and different stakeholders and strategies. And here I would hand over to Doris, but unfortunately our slides are not moving, so I'm not sure if nothing happens, and I can't even see the next slide. And
we're trying to fix it.
thank you. Sorry, Doris. I have left you.
Okay, everybody, get up, stretch, move. You're almost done. Hang in there. Nice.
No chance for their one for lifestyle moves. Yeah. 5 days, one.
Sorry, Doris, you're back.
Okay. Something's happening. Okay, our research can be summarized in answers to 2 questions that just have disappeared again. So the questions were, what if you are a consumer? What are the most important things to do to reduce your carbon footprint? And under what conditions would you do this? Or if you're a policymaker, what are the most important things for you to do to reduce the carbon footprint of your population of consumers?
Probably the PowerPoint. Trying to fix it.
Okay. I'll just keep going. So the answers. You've heard from STEP. The important message that while we, can identify the most impactful carbon footprint options, one core message is that if we want to make the 2050 target, we cannot be selective. We have to implement them all. The largest share of the population possible. Right? It's a huge challenge we're facing. Technology alone, even if we take into account technological developments that are on the way, technology alone won't get us there. Okay, my cheat sheet is back. We heard about what the impactful lifestyle options are in terms of, getting out of the car, especially fossil fuel-powered cars, switching to renewable-based energy and heating systems, reducing floor space, reducing flying, and increasing the share of plant-based nutrition. That adoption can be enabled via a reduction of barriers in terms of affordability, accessibility, in terms of narratives of well-being, and we also still need to increase the awareness of some impacts. We found that, especially in areas where we found very low acceptance rates, and also often correlated with people not having a clear understanding yet of what the impact was. Maintaining impact in terms of not moving into rebounds again means that we need informed and skilled consumers. We need community-based solutions so that individuals are not alone in their pursuit of these things, but we also need market regulation and support of sustainable choices in finance and advertising. Extremely importantly, it's not all on the part of individual consumers and what consumers need to do. It's really also in terms of the structures we have to change to enable to consumers to make these things. We often trigger with the very specific policy instruments that we want to use to get consumers to do this or that, while the big wheels in the background are churning in the opposite direction. So we need to look at, this prioritization, this undifferentiated prioritization of growth. We need to look at the lack of coherence and stringency of the policies and the power of vested interest, and of course those two interact. The lack of internalization of environmental and social costs that we still have. The role of social inequality. Janus told us about what are potentials for moving forward towards an eco-social welfare state. What was the acceptance of different policy options for that among stakeholders? What do they consider feasible, and by when? And finally, Elina reminded us that while all of this was, across the board in our 5 case countries, there are important differences between these countries as well that we need to consider. Implications. I'm going to talk about implications on 2 levels. On the more direct level, we need to make low-carbon lifestyle options accessible, affordable, easy, and fair for consumers to have the broadest potential adoption that we can have. Accessibility, affordability is clear. Easy, you shouldn't misinterpret easy in terms of everything will be hunky-dory. We are facing challenges, and everybody will have to bear some costs and do something. However, for instance, if you're thinking about switching a heating system, right? You know that you're all living full lives, right? You have households with 2 working parents who work a lot, with children to be raised, with their parents, the grandparents still to be taken care of. And then on top of everything, you're supposed to know what to do about changing your heating system. And worry about all of the regulations you have to comply with and getting the money and all of that. Next to your already full life, right? So easy also means we really need organizational support, like one-stop shops, helping people make such changes. The probably most important thing to do is to invest in collective provisioning systems, because those provisioning systems address several of the barriers we found at the same time. They address the question of accessibility, they address the question of fairness, which came up a lot in our discussions, both with citizens and with stakeholders. So from collective provisioning systems, investments in mobility infrastructure, heating infrastructure, housing infrastructure, the whole population can benefit. I already said, beyond that, we also need organizational support. I think something an easy choice, maybe the most convenient choice. If we need financial support, and in some cases we will need it, we need to have it targeted. We're running out of time here. We've had the problem that a lot of the subsidies we've paid, for instance, for electric vehicles, I don't know if it was in all countries, but certainly in Germany, that benefited mainly the upper middle class, right? They don't help poorer people to buy electric vehicles. So you have the Tesla as a status symbol, even though nowadays nobody wants to drive it anymore, but for a time. So we need to make sure that if we have financial support, it's targeted, it's socially just, so that we don't hurt this condition of fairness. And we need to emphasize the alignment of core societal aims in terms of well-being, in terms of health, with climate change. And now I'm going to be really quick, Christoph. That leads me directly into overarching strategies for mobilization, because some of the things you've heard about, we've known for a long time, right? What would be helpful to do? And yet it's not happening. And so the question is, how do we overcome the political barriers to change? How do we overcome these vested interests, invested in the unsustainable status quo, for instance? And here, the core argument we make is that you need to make eco-social justice the cornerstone of goal setting, of communication, and of policy implementation, to keep the society together in pursuit of sustainability. We need to, you've heard this in several work packages, we need to create and strengthen broad actor coalitions to counter the power of particular interests. We need to communicate effectively in terms of target audiences, in terms of content, in terms of narratives. And as a mother of teens, always emphasize also in terms of communication structures. You need to be aware where the next generation is getting their information. And finally, we need transparency in terms of responsibility, but that also involves transparency in terms of impact, so that we can actually hold actors accountable to contributing to a move towards 1.5 lifestyle or taking us away from it. And with that, I'm done. Sorry for going over time, Christoph. Thank you for hanging in there. And I'd like all the presenters to come back up here so that we're here for your questions.
Thanks a lot for the great presentations. A few comments. I agree with most insights, but the structural thing, I'm missing the one thing that is structure in this word, and that's infrastructures. In some instances, infrastructure shapes 75% of what is possible. So I would argue that should be in there. The second point, in terms of when it comes to the barriers, I wonder whether one should be one step beyond, and that's of course, vested interest is clearly one thing. But if one looks into how it's organized, it's really getting into power positions by channeling and controlling media channels, basically. So a better focus on media, I think then it's less general but also specific. Lastly, I would actually challenge one of the conclusions, and that is, it was one slide before, I don't wonder whether we can go back to that. It's about building broad support, right? Broad coalition, very important. And then you mentioned the key narrative should be eco-social justice. And of course, there's a lot of agreement. I think that is really key. But I think with this narrative, we don't get a broad coalition. So I would suggest, okay, do it in substance, but don't use this wording. Because by now, this kind of wording is that it leads to an adverse effect. I think we need conservative communication strategies by keeping the substance progressive. And I think that's like the key direction one needs to go more into that.
Okay, I'll answer to the first two, and you all think about who wants to answer to the justice question. Right? So we did talk about infrastructures, right? The infrastructures do matter. I think investments in infrastructure really matter in terms of getting enabling households to make these lifestyle choices. They didn't come up in Haliki's presentation so much because when we looked at the different structures, we found this distinction in terms of what people looked at between the more visible structures, what we call shallow structures, very visible, rather concrete, can be changed within existing power structures, and deep structures for which all of that is not true. Now, infrastructures are very visible, and we know they have an impact. But in order to make the infrastructural changes, you still sometimes need to change the power structures behind them, right? And especially, for instance, if we look at Germany, if we look at transport systems and investments in there over the last decades and divestments, then you see that infrastructures matter, but so do the deeper structures behind them. Justice, eco-social justice.
Can I say something to that? Sorry, I don't want to get away from this.
No, go on.
I can share it. But yeah, we use eco-social justice, but we mean that we need to think the two, ecological social justice together. But I agree that, when we're building political coalitions, we maybe wouldn't use many of the jargon that we use here. And I think you're right also, and it's also something we've discussed actually in a lot of workshops now, that in the current climate, political climate, maybe we need to step away from using our climate and environmental justice, whatever jargon, and we need to exactly focus on local problems. Health is a key thing. From work package too, right? It's health, cost, convenience, normality, social cohesion. So we need to focus on those, and then in the back of our heads, we're trying to think of how to think it together with the environment. But yeah, sure, you don't want to put that on the große Glocke, as they say in Germany. Maybe you want to be a bit more subtle with your climate activism because of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add on this question from these Delphi discussions. We saw that many of these eco-social policies are very strongly kind of ideologically loaded, no? Because from the discussions in these small groups, some of these policy options triggered a lot of dialogue between different participants in ideologically based dialogue. So, and from what I understand from your question is that some of the countries have more conservative governments, and then we could need change how we communicate about the policy recommendations, and this is also something which we've been discussing with with the press release and things like that. What should we include there? How can we communicate our policy recommendations? But I think project communication or our communication and what we do in the research might be a little separate, no? That we might think how we best shape what we found in our research, so that we reach groups we want to reach.
Although, if I can add something to that, there is an emerging. It's a bit contradictory to that, not that much, but there is an emerging trend that both citizens and stakeholders are encouraging us to be bolder, to be not so, careful about what we say. And it's quite interesting that both the citizens and stakeholders are saying this, and also encouraging policymakers to be bolder, because they see that change is needed. Why are we beating about the bush? Let's be honest. And so we somehow have to balance these two ends. Or two sides.
Please, did I interrupt you? No, okay. So first of all, thank you for a coherent session. The second, my name is Antonetta Di Giulio from the University of Basel. just a comment to what has been said at last by you. I think, Edina, I support it. We have to stand up for our values. So it's not about adapting to language and values that we don't share, but that focusing on environmental concerns is not supportive, is not new. So focusing on well-being is much more of help, and we know that for some years. And I think we need a theory of justice that is convincing, that we can use, because we talk about justice, but we have no theory that we adopt. But no, my questions, or maybe a question to Jessica. Thinking about what we research and investigate, we do much research about changing lifestyle options, or changing patterns of consumption, in order to learn how we could support changes. And I was wondering, would it not be also an option to investigate patterns of consumption that we think are sustainable, and to learn what conditions might be supportive, and lifestyle options that are not sustainable because people cannot afford otherwise, but just because they, for instance, don't fly, or whatever. And a question to Yanis: did you investigate the reasons for why some policy options were undesirable?
Shall I start? Yes, we also did talk in the very beginning. We had interviews with people who had these lifestyle options, some from the beginning as well. What we chose in the end with the workshop was people who had made a change, to understand again the ripple effects of that change. But in those initial interviews, we also had people who had always been. And how that also affected their lives. But we wanted to understand again, because we were asking for changes from people who had not implemented, and higher acceptance from people who had not implemented, we wanted to understand from people who had been those people before. But yes, we also understood then the communities that already exist for those people, because many of the people who had implemented changes found the people who had always lived that way as well. And that was a big part of their story too, of that there are communities of people who have always lived in a more sustainable way. And often those were the people that people changing were turning to as well. So it was part of the story. But it wasn't the main focus always, but it was where we talked to people who lived in eco-villages and had a holistic lifestyle from the beginning, in different communities actually as well. The yoga community came up as well. Yeah, so it was part of it, but not the focus for a particular reason with our project.
Yeah, about the reasons, we didn't really go so much into the reasoning why people support one or don't support another policy option, but throughout the Delphi discussions, stakeholders discussed between each other reasons why we should support this policy option or not. For example, I don't know about the free public transport. There were some experiences that free public transport actually doesn't really provide good enough motivation for those who are already affluent, they have income, that they don't need free public transport. It will not encourage them to move, and these kind of discussions we had in these groups. But I mean, we were not so much intervening in the discussions between different stakeholders. So I don't think we have data which could explain the reasons why one or another option was not supported.
Thank you, panel, for the very insightful presentation. My name is Pranay Kumar. I am from University College of Dublin, Ireland. So thank you. Let me first compliment the panel for the very insightful presentation on multiple layers and dimensions of complexity, starting from the structural barriers, then the complexities regarding the individual behavior to the spillovers and all those rebound effects. very insightful presentation. What I would like the panel to a bit more specific about, not just in terms of policy recommendations or policy outcomes. I want to hear more about something about the policy processes in terms of not just the final food on the table, but also what goes on behind the kitchen, as it was hinted upon in the keynote speech as the big wheels of churning, which is churning in the opposite direction. So could you please elaborate more upon that policy processes which goes on behind in terms of the outcomes? So thank you.
Oh, that's a challenge. I could talk about that for hours, but to give a concise answer to it, I think there is extensive research out there. I'm a political economist by training, and then I've worked a lot on power in the political system, both corporate power and the power of civil society can hold, if for instance by citizen assemblies or such, if they're taken serious. And so we know that these power structures, they have a material and a ideational dimension, and that there is, instrumental power at play in terms of direct lobbying on policy outputs. There's structural power at play in terms of certain issues not even making it on the agenda. Because politicians know or think there's so much opposition to them and worry about, jobs moving somewhere else and so on. And then there's discursive power that goes back to this question of what's in the media and who owns the media, who dominates the media, and how you shape discourse. And that intervenes even earlier in the policy process, right? Often before preferences are formed and influences then what people think is desirable. So there's a huge system of power at play, and that's why it's so important that in the end we not only say, oh, we need better infrastructure, but that we also worry about, okay, and how can we make our democracies function so that they really serve the interest of the population, of future well-being for the population, and not just those who currently hold economic and political power. Maybe that for short.
Thanks for your panel discussion and presentation. My name is John Magnus Roos, and I am representing University of Borås. Some of you during your presentations have been talking about this spillover effect in a lifestyle change. I'm curious about another concept, for compensation, when you self-serving justification, when you, for instance, eat less meat, you can compensate and drive more car. For instance, can you say anything about that behavior?
Yes, I think I also could refer to it as moral licensing effect, that you have this kind of mental offsetting of doing one behavior that then you would under. And there have been some studies of this, of I recycle, therefore I can fly, and the resulting behavior being much worse than the points that you get from the initial behavior. And we looked for that, actually, when we were looking for the rebound effects too, of then the why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And it really also came down to the initial why. Why was somebody making this lifestyle change in the first place, as to what then was the subsequent behavior? And often people were very intentional with these big lifestyle changes. We were talking about quite significant changes to their life that were made with intention and not the intention to offset so much. There was some of that. We had one person who had stopped flying and then said, so I instead have joined a car sharing scheme and I'm driving more. But he was very aware of what had happened here, that yes, now that I'm not flying, I will now drive more than I did before because I didn't have a car. So there was a rebound effect, and there was a little bit of this, I can do this because I gave up. But they were very aware also of the difference between the carbon effects of it. So we found a lot of intentionality, a lot of mindfulness around these behaviors that resulted. Whereas the moral licensing we often see is maybe they are less aware of exactly what's happening next, or the carbon impact of the recycling versus the flying here. But we found a little more intentionality and mindfulness in the behaviors of people with the big lifestyle changes that they were making upfront.
Many thanks for the panel also from me. My name is Daniela Pigoso. I'm from the Technical University of Denmark. And I have two short questions for Stephanie. I think it was a really good presentation. I've been playing with your infographics ever since. And the first question is, to what extent have you considered an increase of consumption per capita that is driven by the changing behavior? And the second question is, it was really interesting to see the rebound effects changing across the different countries. And I wonder, why did they change? What were the key factors driving these different magnitude of the rebound effects in different countries?
So for the first question, just to clarify about increasing, like consumption, increasing the footprint. So if I didn't understand, then I'll find you later. But in the background system model, we did include an increase in, because there was the increase in GDP, like built into that background system assumption, then we also increased household consumption to that same extent. And we also looked at the changes in the consumption patterns due to increased household income from income elasticities. So the kind of counterfactual of this partially decarbonized baseline does include like a slightly different consumption pattern in the later years than in the baseline years. So we did look at the different consumption patterns there. Is that what you meant? Okay. And then for the second question about the different magnitude of rebound effects. So the way that we modeled rebound effects did include the partially decarbonized, the almost fully decarbonized, depending on the extent of this change. But so because we wanted to be intentional about people are making this lifestyle change, so the rebound effect as a baseline is distributed across their already like 1.5 degrees intentioned pattern. So the rebound effects were based on the kind of consumption portfolios in those countries that were already kind of decarbonized with the lifestyle change. So for some of the countries where there was still, let's say, if there was 50% adoption of this lifestyle change portfolio, then that means that 50% of the people had not adopted that change. And then like on average, then that means that there are still some more like high carbon activities that are able to be rebound free spending. So that's one of the reasons for that. But also, all the different countries had different trajectories towards reaching this partially decarbonized background, and that like not every country immediately transitions to 100% renewable electricity with all this industrial decarbonization, carbon capture and storage, whatever. All the countries had their own different pathways when we downscaled them, and it could also be related to the different background systems variations in those countries, but I would say predominantly a combination of those two effects, but we didn't do a decomposition analysis or anything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Magnus Boström from Örebro University, Sweden. My question is, you are focused on low carbon lifestyle. What if we also consider the other huge environmental problems, mass extinction of species, chemical pollution, and the footprints connected to this? Would your perspectives, suggestions, approaches be studied, or do they go hand in hand, so to say, or could there be tensions between these? Yeah.
That's a challenging question too. But we haven't researched that, right? We had to draw the line somewhere. We looked at a lot, but we couldn't do all the different areas where we're facing ecological crisis. And without having studied that, I'm very hesitant to make a strong claim here. Like my gut feeling would be in some areas they would move together, but there might be some where they differ. But please look at it.
Maybe we can make a plug for the MASES project.
Yes.
We are trying to look at all the planetary boundaries and how to mainstream sufficient lifestyles. And not just looking at climate change, but all the planetary boundaries. But I think they're really struggling. So I think they've taken on a lot. And it's very complicated to do that.
And the project is MASES, it's MASES, and it's hosted at the University of Lüneburg in Germany. So you want to look at that?
Hi, Tom Greedis here from LMU Munich. Thanks very much for your presentations. I just had a quick question. To what extent would you perhaps agree or disagree with a slight edit to the main title of this particular slide? To what extent do you think that low carbon lifestyle choices need to be competitive? So if low carbon lifestyle choices are accessible, affordable and easy, but high carbon lifestyles are actually more accessible, more affordable, easier to consume, perhaps helped or otherwise by increasing digitalization, who knows? So maybe you could give some thoughts on that, because I guess if it's not competitive, you're asking people to change out of the goodness of their heart in many areas. I mean, we also talked about some low-income groups, but in actual fact, I mean, they're probably some of the most sustainable and sufficiently oriented people out there. So, so maybe just a comment on maybe competitiveness, how we might challenge that.
Yeah, well, first of all, we're not asking people to change out of the goodness of their heart. That is definitely not our core project. And if you look at the second point, make it the most convenient choice or the only choice, right? So please, yes, consider these things to be, as you phrase it, competitive.
Yeah, or to have even some additional value, that the other choice doesn't have. And we saw this in our labs. We were asking people, what's the positive side effect that you see for any of these impactful lifestyle options? If they see increased or health benefits, or if they see it brings me, into social circles, it makes me feel sort of welcome somewhere or belonging, then that is an asset that you can also use to promote these options, for instance.
We're coming to a close, but I'm not going to let you leave this room without having heard about further things we're doing at this conference. I think he's doing a World Cafe.
Yeah, so tomorrow, I think that voice permitting, there will be other people talking if I don't talk, but I think for something will be in room 201 at the IIE. The IIE building, yes. So come to a World Cafe session.
Other promotions?
Yeah. I should say also the booklet that has been shown. We do have a table outside that has that booklet, the Citizen's Guide, and that there are more papers than we even gave plugs for at the website as well. But these booklets are here in multiple languages. So the book. And we have an online course, a massive open online course that is free, where we also basically give some of the same presentations, but in even a shorter, more pointed form. And we are encouraging people to implement a lifestyle change and reflect on how that change affects other parts of their life, and then come back and share that information with.
And if you're looking for the book, it's on Coursera.
It's on Coursera.
It's also on a stand. There's a little QR code on the
And there is also a climate puzzle workshop Thursday morning at 8. It's very early, but it's very enjoyable. And you can try the climate puzzle in many languages. We have it here in 5 languages, also English following a different design. And I'll be talking about our thinking lab methodology in a session tomorrow, first session in the afternoon about living labs and thinking labs. So you are welcome to come and explore those as well.
Thank you for your patience.